All right, so we are recording. This is Jonathan Cabral, aka the Millennial's Guide to Survival, certified sexologist, sex and relationship coach, and I'm here with AJ Locashio, aka Mama Pistachio. She's a certified life coach and current student getting certified as a sex relationship coach and sex educator. So we're happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
And so AJ is a part of my group. I have a group of other sexologists and sexology students. We're going through a book called the the Psychology of Human Sexuality by Dr. Justin Lehmiller, and it was really exciting for me. I've been wanting to read the book for a while myself, and it actually is a college textbook, and so I kind of thought that I really get a lot more out of it by was reading it with some other people and just had someone else to talk about it with, and just kind of go along and share ideas and just have discussions and kind of learn with each other and whatnot. So it's been pretty fun so far. So let's see, and AJ and I both have read the first two chapters, but we haven't had a lot of opportunity to really go over them with each other. So I'll just go ahead and start back from the beginning and chapter 1. So this book is different, of course, from a lot of other books on sexuality because the majority of them typically focus on the biology of human sexuality for the most part. And this book definitely goes into that as well, but the overall basis for it is of the psychological aspect. So it opens up talking about some of the earlier thoughts and different schools of thought in psychology and different ways of thinking as far as behaviorism and the psychoanalytic theories and the biological, evolutionary theories and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just a lot. So, AJ,
It is.
kind of,
It is a lot, and I
yeah,
think it's really important that we look at the psychological, into all of the theories and everything that have been done throughout history, because when you're working with people, you're going to work with a very diverse group of people, and it's so important to understand your own value systems, your own values, your own beliefs, the biases that you have, and be able to question those. And so going through these theories and looking at, in these first couple chapters, especially the history of sexology and the psychological aspects of it, really helps you kind of go through and work through your own biases so that when you are working with a couple, the last thing you want to do as a sex coach is have somebody say something and you're like, "Ew," that you want to already have processed those and gone through those and know exactly where you're coming from so that you can create a really open space for your clients. I think that's hugely important. So for me, that's why I really wanted to get into this and what I love about it and having these conversations with other sexologists.
right, for sure. So starting out, it talks about the drive. So what drives us to have sex. So it talks about psychological influences, cultural and societal influences. Goes on to biological and evolutionary influences, and kind of those are kind of like the major points. So we talked about a little bit on the group about which, if anyone, do you think is more of a determining factor and what drives us? And maybe we can talk about it, of course, on an individual case by case basis, but in general, which factor do you think plays a larger role in it and the drive, whether it's psychological, cultural, societal, or biological? So, what's your take? What's your stance on that? Which drives us the most? You think?
Well, I mean, I think just the word drive in and of itself is kind of one of those words that's a little touchy in the field right now, where people are arguing that sex is not a drive. And if you look at libido, if you look at Freud's original definition of libido being something that is your libido being your drive to survive or your drive to live, then people start arguing with you that, well, you don't have to have sex to live. And then you've got the other people who say, well, no, but you have to procreate and produce offspring in order for humanity to live. And so just that word drive, before you even get into the chapter, starts a conflict, which I find absolutely fascinating. And, I could care less whether you call it sex drive or libido or whatever, but I think it's really interesting how right now we're starting to come out and we're starting to talk about this a lot more, and people are now starting to argue about, is it a drive, is that the right word for it? And, a lot of our textbooks, they use those terms, and, on the whole plane of sexology, not just in the psychological aspects, it's such a big conversation piece right now. And then you get into this, and it doesn't really matter on what it's called. But again, that's like I was saying, how you have to kind of look at your own biases and ask yourself, do I believe that it's a drive, in order to even answer the question on what do I think it is. And of course, because I talked about how I think that it's very psychologically based, that from a psychological standpoint, that's going to drive us to have sex more than anything else. I know we kind of talked about this a little bit in the group, and I had just watched that documentary where it talked about the biology of psychopathy and how the brain and the biology of the brain works with psychology and kind of how we view things, and then our actions are all based off of that. So I never quite got if you had an agreement or a disagreement with me, and other people weren't really talking about that very much. So I'm really curious to see kind of what you think about that, as far as psychology versus biology being more of a drive.
Cultural and societal influences, all that in there. I definitely believe in the inherent nature of just genetics, just what it is that we inherit from our parents biologically, genetically. I guess see it as like almost like you can see it almost like a ladder, maybe almost like kind of building blocks, like steps. One begins and then leads to the next. But I almost see it as almost like an ever-turning wheel, or like they're all kind of influencing each other constantly. Maybe I do believe in the foundation of biology for all. I think the very beginning of this book, and as well as other psychology books that I've read as well, have said that all behavior is based in biology, it just is. That's not to say, people can use that as an excuse to act in the kind of way they want, but it all begins there, I believe. And so I believe in the biological basis for things. And then I think with biology, of course, there's also hormones and genetics and neurology and the psychology. The psychology, I think, really is influenced by, I really think, both nature and nurture. Really, I think there's an inherent way. Of course, we learn a lot of how we think has a lot to do with our external world and our experiences, especially the first, 5 or 6 years of life. That's kind of how we base our worldview forevermore after that, But yeah, I really see kind of, I think they all really have a place. That's the same thing when it comes to like all the different thoughts of different psychological schools of thought, behaviorism and psychoanalytic theory and so on and so forth. To me, when I look at all of them, I think they all have a piece of the puzzle. I don't think any one is totally right for everything. I think they all have some truth to them. I think they're all needed because they all have their strengths and limitations. They all have their sort of, places where they shine a light and kind of give you like a revelation on something, but then there's more. So that's when I think the next one comes in, But I guess that's really would be my answer. I think they all kind of have their role I think.
Yeah, for example, your mood doesn't matter. You can be in the mood to do it, but if your biology doesn't allow it, then that's gonna, have an effect on you. So that makes so much sense as far as looking at the whole person, the whole individual.
Right. Yeah, and okay, like I think a perfect example for this would be like and the first chapter does touch on it a little bit as reparative therapy, or as people conversion therapy. People send their gay kids off to these camps to try to make them straight. Well, no amount of social conditioning or influencing changes that underlying biological component that just it's just there. It doesn't get erased. It doesn't get changed. I mean, the research is very clear on this. It has been for some time, but people still do it, right, in a way. But it's still there. No matter how long you try to condition someone, even through electroshock treatments and whatever else they do,
Right.
it changes the underlying biological foundation.
Right. Like they can change what they say to match what society wants to hear, but they're not necessarily changing underneath. And that's really, this chapter doesn't delve into it, but I think as we go on, we'll get more into that, where you can't prove it. They can go through one of these camps with this conversion therapy and all of this stuff, and they can come out and say, okay, I'm straight, and there's no way to test that from a biological standpoint. There's no way to test that there has been a change.
Right.
So really it's very subjective and based on, the different methodologies that they use, which, ethically you have to ask yourself if those methodologies are what's in their best interest. But yeah, I think you're absolutely correct on that. It does say in the chapter, it talks about the, hundreds of different animal species have been proven, and there's documentation that homosexuality is normal within the animal kingdom. And it's something that happens all of the time. So in the section where it's talking about evolution and biology, that was one of the big things, that is not something that is just particular to humanity. It's something that is within the animal kingdom, and it's everywhere. Uh-oh, did I lose you? Oh, no, there you are.
I'm still here.
Yeah, switching yourself over to host. Gotcha.
No, I haven't the whole time. It's just we lost connection somehow.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure. I live in a pretty rural area. I don't know where you are, but I live in a pretty rural area. So it's
yeah,
it's not uncommon for me to kind of
goes in and out sometimes. So, I mean, basically what you were talking about is that biopsychosocial model where you have to put all of the pieces together. And would you say that as a sexologist, that would you say that we kind of naturally edge toward that because we look at sexuality as part of the whole human?
Well, I think it's all there. I mean, I think, like I said, I think believing the biological beginning of sexuality, but then of course it plays in your mind. I learned about when I was in school. We talked about the sexual template, which is like basically at some point early on in life, there's someone somewhere who kind of just makes this impression on you, and it's just like that can like later go on to be your type, that type of person that you're interested in, that model person that you chase down for the rest of your life is that ideal romantic and sexual partner, but it's just someone who early on kind of makes a huge impression on you. And so I mean that's, I think, goes along with the psychological aspect, but also the social and culture too. I think, and we were attracted to certain types of behaviors, and I mean certain style of dress and tone of voice. I mean, these are more. I mean, these are kind of a mixture of things. I think the way someone dresses, carry themselves, the type of lifestyle they live, their background. I think it's the whole. Again, I guess for me, it's kind of hard to really pick apart and say it's this, it's that, nothing else. I just kind of see like all kind of coming together. This is how I think. This is when I see it. I think kind of all comes together in kind of just a multitude of ways.
Yeah, and for me, one of the big things is, and why I say that psychology plays a bigger part in it than biology does. And that, I guess that depends on what definition we're looking at. Are we looking at becoming sexually aroused, having intercourse with an end goal of an orgasm? Because that's very different than having a sexual, intimate relationship with somebody without necessarily having orgasm as that end goal. When you're working with couples, or you're working with somebody who has chronic pain, or you're working with maybe somebody who's gone through a lot of trauma, then from a psychological standpoint, you're going to be working a lot with how can we play with the senses and the body as a whole versus that, stereotypical penis and vagina, let's have an orgasm, which is biological. Orgasm ultimately comes down to your body's reacting in a way, but you can have a lot of intimacy and sexual play without having orgasm from a psychological standpoint.
I have a question, but before I ask, I will say that there is a sort of differentiation here. Talk about an orgasm, the psychology versus the biology. Because physiologically, when you ejaculate, male or female, that's just in and of itself. That's just a physiological response. Now, when you talk about an orgasm, though, that is psychological and emotional. That's there are people who. I mean, it does happen. I mean, there are people who, have been in forced, coerced situations that they did not want to be in, and they climaxed, and the person said, "Oh, so you really did like it?" Well, no, they didn't. They physiologically responded. They ejaculated. But if they were not happy, they did not want to be in that situation. They did not have an orgasm. They just ejaculated. People don't understand that.
Right. They had that, end goal sexual climax, if you will.
But so when you're talking about, are you just talking about, are you referring to sex as just people having it in terms of emotional connection versus physical gratification? Ultimately, is that what you're getting at?
Ultimately, the stance where I'm going to come from is as a coach, where it's the whole thing. And oftentimes I work with my clients and tell them that it's not about that. We need to get away from that ideal of having that, final end climax or orgasm, that is sex is so much more than that. Sex is your sensuality and your spirituality all comes into that. That all comes into play when you're having sex versus procreating and having sex to have children.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we know historically there have been tribes of people who just really looked at sex as procreational. Just that was it. Whereas now we tend to have it more recreationally, because so many women are on birth control, use contraceptions of so many different kinds. Where obviously a child is not the end outcome for most of the sex that most of us happen most of the time. But
right.
Yeah. Especially we are taught that we don't, particularly clients who come to you who are coming to you because they are having difficulty climaxing. The first thing you tell them is, stop thinking about having an orgasm, because if you're thinking about it and you can't do it, then you're just inhibiting yourself. So first thing is you stop thinking about it. You kind of get out of that mindset where you have to have one. Well, no, you don't. I'm in school learning about there's some different Indian tribes in the past who believe that they typically tried not to have an orgasm unless they were trying to, I guess, reproduce, but otherwise they tried not to because they believed that you were giving away your life force. So it was something that was not ultimately.
Right.
That's the first thing you tell people. If you're having trouble climaxing, stop thinking about it. Just enjoy, be in the moment. We give them mindfulness techniques to focus on just being present and not thinking about anything else, being in the moment, just enjoying time with their partner, or if they're alone, whatever the case, and they just have a more of a sensual experience. You practice sensate focus and different things and whatnot. And just trying to get them that headspace. Which of course,
Right.
if we talk about that long enough, there are there's sometimes an underlying medical issue, which sometimes needs to be addressed. I mean, anytime somebody comes to me with something like that, I mean, the very first thing I have to say, is have you gone to your doctor? Because I mean, I can give you all the steps and tricks and techniques in the book, but if there is an underlying medical condition, which sometimes there is, none of
Right.
that's going to fix that. So that's first.
Right.
But yeah, I want people to just be free and just enjoy the experience rather than seeing sex as sort of like a means to an end. That was the problem people had later on with Master and Johnson's model of the sexual response cycle, because they believe that, people say, well, it doesn't always end in an orgasm because that was the final stage for them.
Right.
People were saying, well, not it always does end with that. And so that's when they come out with, like Basin's model and different models where it doesn't always start with arousal or desire. It can start somewhere else. And it's just like there's different. It's more of like the circular form of where it kind of goes and flows, and it doesn't necessarily begin or end here. It's just kind of, it really just depends.
Right. Well, and that, as we go through the book, we may, get more into that, but looking at the different theories and the perspectives that are happening here within the first chapter, it's, from a sexologist point of view, it's impossible to just say, okay, well, this is just in one of these categories, because it just doesn't work. Sex just doesn't work that way. Not for humans. It just flat out doesn't work that way, where it's just that, I have this biological need, I'm having sex, okay, I had my climax, I did what I needed to do, and it's over and done with. As you said, there are all of those different psychological aspects that go within that. So I'm really excited to see what happens as we progress through the book, to look more into that.
Yeah, and it's a lot. I mean, I think people tend to think of people who go into sexuality as a profession, as an education and whatnot. They tend to think of, I mean, they always ask a lot of questions, but it's so much just broader than people think. People just tend to think of it as just basics, the birds and the bees, your basic anatomy and physiology and this and that. I mean, they don't
Right.
realize
Like middle school sex ed classes. I mean, I'm a teacher. I've been doing that for years, and moved away from that to work with coaching, because one of the things that I hated most was this tiny, tiny little piece of sex ed that kids got. Whereas, especially in middle school, I mean, this is when puberty is hitting and everything's going crazy, and we put sex ed into this tiny little piece that this textbook can't even cover everything that's going on in these kids' minds. And we talk about the biology of it. Oh, boys have penises, girls have vaginas, blah blah blah, and that's it. And we don't get into any more of that. Kids in school aren't allowed to talk anymore about that, because there's a curriculum that you have to go with, and you're only allowed to say certain things and talk about certain things within that classroom, within that sex ed space. So exactly, people don't realize all of the other stuff that goes around sexuality, even though that's part of who we are as human beings. It's part of what we walk around with every day, all day long.
Yeah, the U.S. as advanced as we are. I've heard apparently we are actually the only country that does not have a mandated sex ed program for schools. So I mean, that means, of course, I mean, that doesn't mean other countries have good ones in place. It just means they have something, whereas we more or less can teach whatever we want, and we do pretty much.
Or not teach it at all.
Miseducation. Yeah. Maybe give a day, like one day out of the year. That's it. And every little, show you how to put a condom on a banana, and you know, that's, I mean, yeah, the extent of it. I mean, oftentimes is just pretty minimal. So.
Right, and we could spend hours talking about where our kids are actually getting their sex ed from, but I don't think this is the right forum for that.
Oh well, it's always a sensitive thing you bring up to people. I have friends who have kids, and so many of them, like any parent, I'm sure, I don't have kids. I'm sure like any parent, good parent, they want their kids to stay kids for as long as they can and be innocent and young. Just be innocent, They, I mean, I think maybe, I kind of tend to tread lightly because I don't have kids, but I think maybe because I don't have kids, I can be more objective and say, I just think it's a little, sorry, but I think it's irresponsible when you have a 6-year-old who has not asked you yet, where do babies come from? Like, you're okay with that. You leave it alone. You don't touch it. You don't want to tell them, oh, they're just innocent. They probably wonder. To me, I think if they haven't asked you by the time they're 3 to 5 years old, they've thought about it. And they're just not going to ask you because, well, they probably get the feeling that, mom, dad, you're tight. You're tight about this. You're not going to talk about this. They might not know the first thing about it, but they're receptive, so they know this is just something that they know they're not going to get the answer from you. So what do they go? Now, of course, they go on the internet. They ask their friends. They might be asking. If you're lucky, they'll ask, a responsible adult in their lives. Typically, I think they go to other sources. So I just feel like, I know everybody always says, when I have kids, I'm going to do it. One thing I really do feel strongly about is like, I deal with that. If they haven't asked me by the time they're about 5, I feel like, we need to talk about this because
well, I mean, you've had lots of opportunities by that time I'm sorry, I'm letting my dogs outside. You've had lots of opportunities by the age of 5 to have conversations with them because, again, and this is going back to, we're really not off topic here. This is going back to that, society. And in our society, at 3 years old, when your child is sitting on the couch watching cartoons and, your little girl is diddling herself or your little boy is playing with his penis and, so let's use the big people term here, they're masturbating because it happens regularly at that age. And most parents, their initial, and I say most because it's not all, but their initial reaction in our society is stop that, that's bad, don't do that. Whereas there are others who would use that as an opportunity to have that conversation of the appropriate place to do that, not necessarily whipping it out in public and using that as an opportunity. So if, at the age of 5 or 6, you haven't had conversations surrounding sex, my opinion is that you haven't taken those really great learning opportunities to have those conversations about normal sexuality, and that's because your parents told you not to do it, their parents told them not to do it, and here we go, we're continuing what's normal in our society because sex is not normalized. It is not a normal part of our society, regardless of how much it's on TV or in the media.
Yeah, that's true. It's still very much a thing that someone I've heard. We are equally obsessed with and ashamed by it. I mean, just are everybody.
Yeah,
so,
I said that it wasn't exactly the forum for it, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it up because we do have, you know, where it talks about observational and social learning in here, and, you know, the media, which we just brought up, and pornography. These are the places where our children are learning the most about sex. Right now, you know, as a middle school teacher, I can tell you that it was not a bizarre thing at all to have kids talking about porn, something that they had seen on porn, or telling their friends or sharing it with them through, whether it be through social media or through texting, sharing information with them. And that's where they're getting a lot of their information and learning about sex. And that can be good in some ways. But unfortunately, the way much of the pornography that is out there, especially what they can find, you know, very easily on Pornhub and these sites that they can get stuff on very quickly, it's not a diverse sexuality. So it's not real as far as what we want our kids to be able to see and feel and understand. All of the vaginas that they see on there are going to be these tiny little vaginas that are not, and I should say vulvas instead of vaginas, but you know, they're going to be seeing these tiny little, you know, all shaven Brazilian waxed vulvas. That is not the norm for our kids. And then our boys expect that when they actually see one. They expect that they should have huge penises. You know, a clitoris cannot be, you know, sticking a little bit outside of the labia. That's not normal because that would never be seen in porn. And then they have these ideas in their head of what sex is supposed to be. And then when it's not, they're disappointed or frustrated or angry or shamed because of that observational learning that they're getting, rather than having just some real transparent, honest conversations about it with educated adults.
Yeah, actually, chapter 3, which gets into anatomy and physiology, actually mentions that how really the people who are chosen to, you know, the performers in porn movies, I mean, they're always a very rare breed, the men and women both. I mean, like you said, there's a very I think it said only like 2.5% of men, I think worldwide, from what I understood, have a penis that's bigger, longer than like 6.5 inches.
Right.
And the vulvas, always the ones that they show there are very rare. That's not the norm for most women, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that actually, because, you know, that's kind of part of my point for kids is that, you know, these parents, you know, I have friends like that who, you know, they say they're very strict about, you know, oh, I have parental controls on all my kids' devices, on their tablets, on their phones, their computers. I monitor what they see, you know, 24/7. Maybe you do, but okay, they go to school, right? And they go to school with other kids whose parents maybe don't have parental controls on all these devices. I don't care how well you think you know Tommy's dad and Susie's mom and so on and so forth. They're probably, I mean, there's a good chance they're not all strict with you. And even if you do know every kid in that class and their parents for now, they do get throughout the year, especially, you know, early on. So somebody new can come in and, I mean, you don't know anything about them. And what they are maybe sharing with your kids. I mean, nobody, at a certain point, you know, once your kids have reached school age, or whether they're going to daycare or, you know, kindergarten, first grade, grade school, whatever, I mean, you're not with them all the time. There's no guarantee. You can't assume that they're leaving the house and coming back knowing about sex only what you told them, you know, throughout the day, throughout the year. I mean, there's just so much exposure, you know. So I just think, like, yeah, it's true. They share so much with each other, just really without a second thought. It's there.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the observational learning is talking about, is this, all of this that's around them, it's there, it's in their faces. It doesn't matter what you want them to know. It's not about want. It's about knowledge is power. Education is important. And, you know, we tell we tell them all of the time that education is important. And sexual education is just as important as knowing our history and how to read.
Yeah, education is power, except when it comes to sex. In that case, ignorance is bliss. This is what people think, you know.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, ignorant people get taken advantage of, and none of us want that for our children. And it's
That's the
not.
thing too.
People do what?
No, I was just gonna say people assume that as soon as you give your kids proper sex education, they're gonna go out and become these huge nymphomaniacs. When really the research shows that with proper education, not scare tactics, but with proper education, kids actually have less sexual partners. Nobody wants their kids having sex. You know, teenagers, of course, but I mean, they're going to a lot of the times. But when they're educated properly, they do have less partners. They do use protection. They are safer. Whereas when they don't, they still have sex, but usually it's maybe delayed because they've had enough of a fear instilled in them.
Mm-hmm.
But nature runs its course still, so they do. But when they do, they're not careful about who they're having it with. They're not using protection because nobody taught them these things. So then they get pregnant or STIs, and it's like, what do you do? Because nobody taught them. Really.
Right. Right. And unfortunately, they have been taught, and I think that's why this first chapter goes over that, the classical conditioning and the operant conditioning, and the different ways that we influence behavior, because your reaction as a parent or as a society to a behavior can decide the reaction that person has later on. So if they're constantly getting that negative feedback, then there are people who have that belief that if you get shocked every time you do something, that you're never going to do that again. That's not necessarily the case, and we're starting to come out of that belief system that works.
Yeah, that's what, before I read. Go ahead. Go on.
You cut out. I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, no, I stopped. I said, you go ahead and finish what you were saying.
I think I was done. So punishment, we're showing that punishment is not a good way of deterring behavior. And when we say punishment, we think, getting a spanking or whatever, but that could also just be that negative reaction that, ugh, that isn't the best way to teach somebody. It's being shown through research that it doesn't work. And I think that's why this chapter brought that to light, because it's important to understand when we're talking with a client, if they were raised in a family where it was, negative feedback or punishment is the way they were directed for their behavior on how they were supposed to grow and believe, then we have to be able to respond to that. And if we believe that ourselves, that punishment is the way to get rid of a bad behavior, then we're going to react very differently than, say, if we believe in the observational learning that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing about, they mentioned that the operant conditioning, that positive reinforcement does work better than punishment. And to me, my point of reference always goes to an episode of The Big Bang Theory, or Sheldon's trying to, I think Leonard and Penny were dating more at this time, and so she was over at the apartment a lot more, and Sheldon was trying to get her to, she had a habit of getting on the phone or laughing really loudly whenever Sheldon was like watching one of the shows or something. So to get her to stop, he would kind of just look at her, and she would kind of just stop. He'd offer her a chocolate.
Yes, I love that episode.
To leave the room and go have a conversation. And then Leonard kind of caught on. He's like, I don't think he used the term operant conditioning. He's like, are you training her to do why? He's like, you can't do that. He's like, yes, I can. It's working.
Not only can I do it, but I am doing it successfully.
So, well, it's the first time I read it, that's just immediately where my mind went. Just, I don't know if I don't.
Oh,
Yeah, it's true.
that was a great link. But as a sexologist, you know, let's say you have a couple come to you, and every time they get in a fight, one of them stops having sex with the other as punishment for being a jerk or whatever. That does not work nearly as well as giving a reward, you know, a back rub, a foot rub, something sensual, or having sex, you know, traditional penis and vagina sex. Doing that in order to reward a behavior that you like. And if you do that more, you're going to get more of that behavior.
One of our members in the group was talking about that. It's the first thing she noticed, and she kind of uses it for her husband. She was sharing. Which, I mean, I think it's always a bad idea to withhold sex. I understand. I mean, if you're angry, okay, no, you're not in the mood right now, but talk it out. Don't go to bed mad and withhold for a week because oh, I'm angry. I'm going to no, because then you're just breaking down communication and connection. Do it enough, they're going to start to wander off. That's what happens.
Well, and not only that, but you're punishing yourself as well.
Well, yeah, of course.
So now you've got two people who are angry and frustrated, and that communication, like you said, isn't going to be there, and just
That's never a good idea. That's the worst thing you can do. So many people do it and think they're getting somewhere. Like, no, you're not. You're really making a very bad decision. Actually, the best you can do is just talk it out. I mean, even if it gets some people tend to kind of avoid confrontation a little bit, but I mean it's necessary sometimes. You just have to go in there and just hash it out.
Right.
It's better than being passive aggressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking, what else did you want to talk about in this chapter?
No, I mean, there's plenty here. I mean,
yeah, I was going to say we've kind of gone over a lot of the big stuff. We didn't really get into like the personality, the different personality traits and how those go on with sexual behavior. I mean, how long are you wanting this? We've been on for an hour.
I mean, yeah, I have time. I mean, when do you have to be anywhere at a certain point, or?
I have maybe another 15 minutes, but I just wonder if talking with the group and doing something just on that personality theories, doing a little thing just on that could be a really interesting topic for the group.
It's good, sure. So with you, okay, so they get into the big five, which is the big five personality traits: the openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism. And they have the table here that talks about how each of them relate to sexual behavior. So what do you think about this table?
Well, I mean, all of that is going to play into, me being somebody who really, truly believes that, our state of mind and our psychology is going to play a huge part in our sexual expression. Let's just look at just the very, very first one, the openness to experience. Okay, so you're in a couple. You have one partner who is very open to things, and you have one partner who is very closed to things.
This tends to be how it is a lot of the time.
Exactly. That's exactly why I wanted to bring that up, because that right there can create a huge rift, and everything else in their relationship could be wonderful, but if around the topic of sexuality there's this closed-mindedness in one and this openness in another, you're going to have sexual frustration that is happening, and most likely you're also going to have this imbalance of vulnerability and shame, because the person who is open is going to feel ashamed of their desires. They're going to question themselves when their partner is consistently shutting them down. No, 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 we're not doing that. No, that's disgusting. and you're going to have a huge rift, even if everything else in the relationship is wonderful. And that's keeping them from experiencing that true joy that they really could as a couple.
Right. Yeah, I think part of that kind of comes in. I mean, it depends on what it is, more or less. But not, Esther Perel says that everybody comes out of there's kind of two different types of people. You know, one person, we all come out of our childhood. Some of us needing more autonomy and independence, and some of us need more closure and connectedness. And a lot of times you find those people in relationships with each other because they're trying to, heal these opposites. And so, yeah, I think a lot of times those people who are closed off, I mean, it depends on what it is, but especially when it comes to like opening up the relationship to, other people, they're afraid of losing that partner, whereas the other person is more free and open and experience different things and whatnot. When they're afraid of losing, like one person's more afraid of losing themselves, one person's more afraid of losing the other person, as she puts it. So.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's why I think if we could as a group, get on here and have 4 or 5 of us having a discussion about each of these, that could easily take an hour, just this one chart. And I think that could be really beneficial to others in in sexology as well, because this is really a big thing that we're going to be dealing with our clientele. And I love that it's hit on so early in this book.
Even beyond this, and we're talking about the big 5, I mean, there's so many different ways of breaking down personality. I mean, you have the the Briggs-Myers personality, however many there are of those, and then you have ways of, another school they taught us to identify the different types of learners, the people who learn more through visuals or audio or hands-on kinesthetics. Just by the way they talk, you identify what type of learner they are. So I mean, the personality, that just goes into so many different kind of things beyond just the big 5. There's so many ways of breaking that down to how people learn and communicate and process information. I mean, that's just huge. I mean, you spend forever figuring that out just based on that personality.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a huge topic, and it's good to hear so many different perspectives in it. And like the erotophilia and erotophobia that it has in here, a lot of us, if we're in the field of sexology, we're really going to be on one side of the spectrum. But are we able to look through the entire spectrum and understand? And what kind of a coach are you going to be to somebody who comes in and they're really on that phobic side, and you have to be careful with pushing them.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a fine line. I think you just have to really take the time to learn your client and learn their their value system, and kind of just figure out slowly over time, okay, what's okay with them, what can we do? Because you never want to generally push anybody like down a flight of stairs. You want them to take one step at a time, just kind of slowly progress.
Yeah, something that might take you 2 sessions to do with one client might take 12 with another, just depending on where they are and what their personality is, and all of the different spectrums that we can be on. And even, wouldn't you say, even saying whether this client is somebody who is, maybe you would want to refer elsewhere, because not that they're not a good client, but that you're not going to be the best coach for them based on where they fit within all of this personality as well. Wouldn't you say?
Right. Well, I think that's more times than not. I mean, I guess it doesn't always happen, but you typically prefer to make that decision during the intake form. Finding out their psychological history and saying somebody who's currently dealing with a major, psychological crisis of some kind, whether it's a mood disorder or a full-blown personality disorder. I mean, those people sometimes are not comfortable, and I have to go on. care sometimes for that before you can even really work with them because I mean they're whatever it is, their depression or anxiety or um, I mean just all kinds of things, you know, communicate
Right.
multiple
But even outside of any kind of an underlying medical issue, even if there's not any pathology going on, there are going to be some clients that are going to work better with a different coach. And you know, I've had people come to me and I've said to them, you know, you are not in a state right now where you are coachable. And I think that's
yeah,
really important for us to be able
yeah,
to
sometimes, yeah.
be honest with our clients and say, you know, right now that's not where you are, or because of this personality trait, I have this friend who is going to work much better for you than I would. You're going to get a lot more from them than you would from me just because of this particular personality trait.
And I think that's just where we kind of have to put our egos aside and just be realistic and just say, you know, we want the best for them, however it comes about. So it might not be me or you, it might be somebody else, you know. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that's why I love that this is here and this part of the book. It's right up there, and it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning of how important it is for us to be able to set our biases aside and look at things, you know, have the right perspective on it to be able to say, you know what, I am not going to be the best person because of who I am. I'm not going to be the best person to work with somebody who has this particular trait. Maybe somebody with, I don't know, extroversion. I'm just pulling that out. But maybe that's not somebody who I'm going to be able to work with as well as maybe another coach would be able to work with them. And you know, so for me, it's really exciting to see that early on in the book because it does make you question that and ask those questions, which is super important for coaches to do early on in their career. I'm sure you can hear my husband in the background. He's playing video games.
Okay. I thought I was going to be watching sports, but yeah, that makes sense too, either one.
So for me, it's 6:15, and it is time. I'm going to have to get off of here and get to, I'm on the, you know, I know it's a little later for you. It's 6:15 where I am. It's 8:15 where you are. But yeah, I have a couple things that I need to get done. But so we'll talk in the group on what we're going to talk about next time and plan on meeting again next Thursday.
Yeah, that works for me. We didn't even get into chapter 2, but we can just do that next week.
Yeah, and if you want to get together another time and maybe, like I said, I really find this chart fascinating and the personality part of chapter 1 really fascinating and very pertinent to what we do. So if you did want to get together and do just a video or a discussion of just that part, I would be game for that, for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's something you want to share, I mean, you go right ahead. You know, I mean, I'm kind of right now running a one-man show, but like I said early on, everybody, you're all free to share as you like. So you go for it. If something you want to initiate, I'm
Okay.
fine with that, you know.
Cool. Sounds good. I love it. So we'll talk to you in the group and see you next Thursday.
All right, sounds good. Thanks
Awesome.
for being
Thanks so
here.
much. Have a good one.
Yeah.